Welcome to Unlikely Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspire our conversations. I'm Dr. Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson, and you're at the intersection. The interesting thing about intersections is that we all go through many intersections daily, and the way we navigate these determines the trajectory of our day and our life. Today, we want to bring to you a special composite episode with two of our guests, Dr. Abe Kouris and Mr. Geoffrey Roche. Their topics are compassionate leadership and leading with the heart. We feel like these two really go together well, and we hope you enjoy it as much as we have.
You know, you cannot ask for two better topics going together, especially with the state of healthcare today, with people discussing how they're being treated in the healthcare systems. And given that we're still in a pandemic, we still have to be human. And that's what these, at the very root, that's what they talk about, how to be human in the healthcare system.
We will start with Dr. Abe Kouris. Terry, big day today. Interesting topic.
Yes, it is a very interesting topic, compassion. And who better to have as a guest as Dr. Abe Kouris, who is actually an ambassador of compassion. You know, Dr. Kouris is an author. He's an expert in compassion. He is a very compassionate human being with a lot of knowledge, and his work is extremely important to us, and it is such an honor to have you on this morning. How are you this morning?
Good morning to both of you. Such an honor to be with you. I'm very good.
Well, thank you for joining, and tell us a little bit about this whole concept of compassionate leadership so our listeners can get on the page with us.
Compassionate leadership, it's an emerging trend, and it's a very needed, proven by COVID, it's very needed. Compassionate leadership, as we envision it through my research and the research of others, it deals with helping others without receiving anything in return. It's a change agent to change and improve the status quo as we have today, politically or through the organization. It takes us from the I, as we learned to in the past, to the we.
Yes.
It's instead of thinking of the I only, which we encourage through the journey we created along the way, to the we, the society, we, the organization, we, the people in general. So we have something called the pyramid of the compassionate leadership. It's a journey. It has 7 levels. It starts with self-compassion, meaning we still appreciate the I, we still embrace the I, but we improve it for the purpose of helping others. We will be if you want to become a billionaire, you can, but also think of others and to improve their lives. In that level, in the self-compassionate leadership journey, the first level is you improve yourself. You make yourself healthy, wealthy, educated, well-groomed individual for one purpose, to be of service to others. And then we go to the next level. The next level is next of kin. Mind you, these levels, 7 levels, they are based on being mindful and being self-aware. These are very important. To be self-aware of the environment you're in, to be mindful of the environment you're in, so you can scan it and assess it and provide solutions to the individuals or teams or society that you are serving. The next of kin is when you build yourself and you make yourself ready, you go to the neighborhood, to your brothers, to your siblings, to mother. You improve the environment, the second environment that you're in. And also try to bring them on the same wagon by being mindful, by being self-aware, and also improving their lives. After this, we go to the local environment. The local environment is you patronize its services. You see what else they have, what they need. You as a leader, a compassionate leader, when we say compassion, we don't pity others. We are in service to change the status quo of a cruel society, of a cruel environment, from the cruel to being merciful, to the cruel for being compassionate. So we are a change agent, a very hard job, that must be taken and undertaken. And the more we create people that believe in the same concept, the better better we're ready to change society in general. And then we go to the organization. In the organization, we're going to tell them to the shareholders, we're going to make you the richest you want to be. We are the talented individuals in this venue, in this organization. We will make you. You want to make a billion? We're going to help you become a billionaire. We're going to assess and help you with that. We're going to tell the leadership, we're going to also invest in you. We're going to also invest in the employees. In the employees, instead of surviving, we're going to make them thrive through concept. And also, we're going to go to the consumer, to the customer, and we're going to add value to the consumer. We're not going to just use them to become richer. We're going to add value to them so they can also become valuable part of their purchase with us, their service with us will also add value to them. And then we go to the larger community. We invest in hospitals. This is where the corporate responsibility comes. We invest in hospitals. We invest in probably houses of worship. Anything to make the citizen of the community we serve quality of life, added quality, become involved, become engaged. After this, we go to the sixth level, which is the society. And the society become a model citizen to help the society in general, to bridge the gap, to be the person who, or the individual or the leader that makes the difference in that society. And then we go to the highest level, which is the peak of the pyramid, which that will be you become the compassionate leader where you're serving others without receiving anything in return, just for the purpose of serving them. We found it through the research that 70% of people that we surveyed, believe in the service of helping others and being compassionate toward others. However, those 70% or these 70% are very, in a way, they go with the leader. The leader sets the tone. If the leader is compassionate, they will go with that leader. We call these the masses. They survive. They survive whatever. What is it for me? I believe I want to help others. Am I receiving something in return? If they are, then they will go with it. If someone not compassionate, then they will join that individual. So 70%, that's a large number. Then we found 18%. 18% of people, they say they don't care because they were burned by others, meaning they helped them and they were not reciprocated back in kind, so they decided not to help others. Through the research, we found if you reciprocate back in kind, they will change and they'll be added to the 70%. We found 8% of the individual and leaders that we surveyed that they really don't care. The people who are suffering, they deserve it because it's their own way of doing things. They should have had different approaches. So they don't really care for any of them. And then we found 4%, only 4%. These are the shaker and makers. Those are the one that will actually do the initiatives to help society and be of service to them. These 4%, they're powerful because they're driven toward helping others and being of compassionate toward others. And then we found if we employ such model, then we have collaboration within the work environment, within the society, within the organization. We have trust. The trust is created. We have engagement. We have psychological safety that you can say anything. You can give your feedback and nobody will punish you. You're not going to be demoted or promoted or fired for these things. I mean, you can say whatever you want. We have found that employee retention, you can employ retention because you're creating a shared value, something to believe in. And that's very important in having an organization that cares for others and employees and teams that cares for others. For the collaboration, I found this. So when an organization in general is built, as you know, it's consists of individuals, teams, and groups, basically people, for the common purpose to achieve an objective of an organization. When we bring them along and we have them to achieve an objective, we want to change their behavior to work with us. So what we do have something called motivation. Motivation, we give them incentives, we give them bonuses. Some individuals, they have internal, intrinsic motivation. That's something, give them an appraise that be happy. Others, no, they want to receive bonus. And some, they have external. But for one purpose is to achieve an objective. And this is what the collaboration goes to. In today's trend, what you create is you create two teams and you have them compete for the service of achieving an objective. We found no, collaboration will have a better result. You have them collaborate for the same common purpose. This is through compassionate leadership because you added shared value. We found other things. Let's see, diversity. Diversity is also encouraged because it's more sincere. I'm not just putting as a leader, I don't just put a face, someone that looks like the community I'm serving, but my board is some other people. Or so basically, diversity is more authentic and transparent, and that's also part of the research found.
Dr. Abe, if I may, it's obvious you've done extensive research in this because this is who you are, a compassionate leader. Let me ask this question. What was it that inspired you to go down this journey of what it meant, or how you create a compassionate leader?
Well, as you know, before COVID, we've always had leaders that weren't up to par. Call them cruel, call them ruthless, call them careless, call them whatever you want to call them. But they weren't leaders that care. And then COVID came in. COVID came in and made us think inwards toward our individual selves. And then you saw how some leaders, in some countries, without naming specifics, they start saying us versus them. They caused it. They this, they're that. So that wasn't an approach of leadership that will encourage collaboration for the betterment of others. This is where the development of the pyramid started in 2021. 2022, we finalized the research. 2023, the book is coming. The actual manifesto of the compassionate leader. It's a journey. So really it started even before. There's no specific time I would say, but we're observers. We observe, we see. So you see leaders are not always good leaders. They're hurting others, whether internationally, whether locally, whether in organization. And you've seen it with the suffering of employees. They're just surviving. We're saying don't do that. We're saying have them thrive. Let them, since they're making you the revenue needed, why don't you add to their value? Make them thrive. What scale? That to be discussed. But make them, don't just give them minimum wages or a little bit of this and that. Make them really thrive. Because if you make them thrive, the research tells us that they will be more loyal because they feel part of the environment. So they add to it. They understand their limitations. There's the share value, the shareholders, the leadership, and they understand who they are, but they know they're benefiting more if you add that to them. And also they will serve the customer and the consumer more. It's very interesting. I think COVID was the trigger really that put it all together.
So when I hear all this, it's fascinating, of course, and as a physician, it always makes me think, well, can you use what you see to diagnose? So when you look across industries and see what's happening in those workforces, does that help you diagnose what's happening at the leadership level? Because one of the things that we see happen in leadership a lot, is many leaders are controlled ultimately by a board, and that board is controlled by the leader who presents only what they want them to see and in a very curated ways. So is there an ability to look out into a given workforce and when you see certain characteristics, does that give you a hint that there's a diagnosis of of inept leadership, or maybe inept is maybe it is just cruel leadership, or is that possible, or does the research not go that deep?
Well, you mentioned something very important, which is healthcare. Healthcare by default, they have care in them. I mean, they as a medical doctor, a nurse, someone in the profession, by default, they're programmed to care. They're compassionate by default. What level and how, that will be to be measured. So as far as healthcare, when she says I am a nurse, by default she has a noble profession. Why? She's in service of others. So we don't measure if she's compassionate or not. We measure in a private hospital, is it for what purpose? Is it for profit or not? And what is the leadership? Is the leadership setting the tone or not? I met with the president of larger Adventist healthcare in our area. She told me there's Adventist and there's another hospital. She tells me during the time she called them to check on how they're doing. That you don't see that in the corporate world. We're encouraging, don't compete, collaborate, and not only within the organization, even outside of an organization, meaning an organization to another organization. So when she did that she exhibited a compassionate approach of collaboration. So to go further is you look at the overall stage of this corporation or that organization. What are the behaviors of its employees? And at that time, if you see a random sampling of people behaving in a way that is in line with what you do, probably the leadership has set the tone. And then you go deeper and deeper. There is nothing that tells us from just looking at it from outside. As an observer, we may have guidelines on what to look for, but there is nothing specific to say if this organization is compassionate or not and what's employing. Very, very tricky to go into saying this is a compassionate organization versus not compassionate organization.
Go ahead, Doc.
I was going to say it's interesting because you see a lot of healthcare organizations as a part of their corporate values. You'll see the word compassion.
Yes.
And it's
default. It's by default.
Right. It's because it's supposed to be there. Right. And
yes.
Then, the community of users of that service don't ever they don't care anything about the values of the organization, right? That's not what they're there to do, but they can often tell you whether that value is being met, it seems.
Well,
based on their experience.
We also interviewed the employees of this president, and we said, what do you like about your job? She said, that's not a job. This is a family. We're serving others.
Mm-hmm.
So that leader, I had an article on her as well. That leader set the tone, well, probably the culture overall, because of the background of the organization, set the tone that saying not only the leader cares, but also the employees care. And you see, it's a reminder, stimuli. You see pictures everywhere that we care. They mention God, they mention this, they mention that, just to remind probably the visitors, but mostly the employees, that we are in what we're serving. So the culture and how it's built also reinforced by these stimuli that they provide. Not only a mission statement, but actual things that they provide.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you've mentioned diversity as related to compassionate leadership, the evidence has been clear for quite some time around those organizations that are more diverse fare better financially than those that are not. Is there any clear evidence that shows that the compassionate organization, the compassionate business, has a tendency to be a more profitable business?
Okay. So we have models. models that in line with compassionate leadership. We have in common our friend, and you had him on, Gary Ridge. He had servant leadership. And if you're a servant leadership, I'm sure you touch on the compassionate leadership as we envision it. So yes, it does. I mean, we see successful corporation here, not only them, but the others. Yeah, the research and reality tells us compassionate leadership. If you imagine this, though, imagine an environment flourishes through shared value, caring, with a purpose. The purpose not only making money, helping society in general. The common sense plus research, they do tell us that absolute success is the result of any venue that will employ such service or such model. You know, not only the profitable approach to it, but also the wellness of the employees. Stressful environments everywhere. There's an anxiety, people leaving the job. There's no way you can retain them, no way you can engage with them. Compassionate leadership, compassionate leadership as we envision is someone who say, what's going on? How come you're coming late? Not to punish you or demote you. Is there something I can do for you? Do you have issues at home? Do you need a loan to go to school? They care. They show that, and if somebody cares for the individuals, in return, they're going to reciprocate in kind. Yeah, it's very powerful. It's a very powerful model.
It really makes me think of March Madness right now. If you look at the teams that have been so highly successful, and you know that now they've got the video stream in the locker rooms, and you hear the conversations, and those teams talk about values like family, like they love one another, like they share credit. They do all these things that I hear basically are components of compassionate leadership, and it starts from those coaches in those programs. But it really it's a finite example, a modern moment example of how that works. And it's interesting because the factors that are existing in college basketball right now, whether it's the transfer portal where the athletes can move back and forth, or the one and done where they just turn pro, those are a lot of the same employee factors that we face in many industries, healthcare in particular, which is where I'm most familiar. But these coaches are making it work using those type values, the we, not me.
Yes, that's how they succeeded. Now, it's the same system duplicated everywhere, regardless the old system. So these new service people that of service to others, regardless of what we call them, they're tapping onto the compassionate leadership approach. When they say we're in the military, we're a family, right? Where is that coming from? Is that the military? It's a bureaucracy. It's a hierarchy. Below the line, they want you to be a family, but above the line, you listen to what we tell you. See, they employ it. It's selective employment of. So what we're saying, let's make it all the way to the leadership. And a compassionate leadership in the military is not going to think about sending anybody to war. It's going to have ways to create peace. Because the enemy doesn't become an enemy anymore. The enemy is another, you call it a human being, you call it whatever it is, but there is a different mindset in the mind of the leader. Because when you win is when you don't have wars. Not to have a war. And that's on the military level. In the organizational level is how do you win? Collaboration. You see the community you're serving. What can you do to this community? These are the levels, how mindful you are. If you are in the society, how can you create a political system is inclusive of all? You know, it's very interesting how you can shift from one to the other, from one level to the other, based on being mindful.
Yes.
The key is you gain the momentum, the internal understanding that you are not just a small human being. You belong you belong to society, and you become a global thinker in a way. Even if you are working as an employee only, with a specific small description, job and description, even title, if you think in the compassionate leadership approach, you are connecting with the leadership. You're engaging with the leadership because you understand what they want and they understand what you want. This model, if employed properly, would really make the environment healthier. There will be no gossip, and probably no gossip. You can't provoke, diversity in others and psychological safety, because not everybody is the same. But if you have key people with this understanding, the environment, not only positive, as we mentioned, of the company, but environment, everybody wants to make this company a successful company.
All businesses, whether you're offering a service or a product, are in the business of providing solutions. So as we're in business or we're in education and we develop solutions for our challenges that we face, be it organizational or societal. For me, I've gotten to the point, and I asked the question, how does this solution help humanity? How does this solution help with the scourge of discrimination, bias, racism, sexism? So I've been listening, that you've hit on some key points, right? So if you can just recap a little bit around, how does compassionate leadership solve all of those isms that we have? Because it's truly about humanity.
Yeah, it's the suspension of judgment, also part of it. When you suspend your judgment, you don't see people of age, of color, of religion, of gender. You see them as who they are. How are they interacting with you? As far as race, we talked about that, and one time you reminded me with something. When we talk about racism and slavery, somebody with compassionate leadership and mindset, they don't say, a powerful term I'm going to use here, but they don't say white people enslaved black people. They say cruel people within the white race enslaved black people. Because the minute you generalize, you individually, as an individual, you're going to look differently at the other side. So what we're saying is, be mindful of the environment you're in and you're projecting. So you see, example, white, you see a white person that isn't a lie to you, and white person is cruel. So you know how to distinguish the two. Same thing goes on ages, female, social orientation, sexual orientation, everything. The minute you suspend your judgment and you see what others having through being mindful and self-aware, your mindset will determine the decisions you make, the words you say, the action that you project and perform. Your behavior and demeanors will also be influenced by this mindset.
I'm always fascinated by the whole concept of suspending judgment, because that's been a personal journey for me, right? As somebody who's trained as a surgeon, who's trained to make quick judgments, it's easy to let that carry over into other aspects of life, but it's incredibly hazardous. And so I've been on this long pursuit of exactly that, of suspending judgment, of making sure that I basically try to keep myself open. I'm careful about what I allow myself to say to myself, in a way. I try to be. Long way to go. The mental chatter concept of judgment is a really, really difficult thing, and puts us in some compromised positions as leaders. I wondered if you could expand a little bit more on ways to suspend judgment and how to use compassionate leadership in that way.
Absolutely. When you suspend your judgment, you're actually helping yourself as a leader, or as an individual, or as a listener, anybody listening. When you suspend your judgment, you allow others to talk. You allow others to express their right to express whatever they want to say. You're not imposing your value system on them.
We hope you enjoyed that small segment from Dr. Abe Kouros. Of course, you can see the entire episode by going to our website, unlikelyintersection.com, or checking us out on YouTube or Facebook. Now we'd like to switch you over to Mr. Geoffrey Roche, Leading with the Heart.
Listen to how passionate he is as he describes what the needs of the healthcare system is. And given the roles that he's had in healthcare, he is really pioneering something that is actually needed and new to the healthcare space.
Here's Geoffrey. A lot of the Navy SEAL videos talk about how, they ain't no holding anybody accountable,
That's
right? Like you're counting on them. They have to do it. And we get that so wrong that we end up doing exactly what you said, which is management-driven problem solving, that it just invariably it starts you a few degrees off whatever's true. And by the time you actually get to implement something, you're way off. Mm-hmm. And, other industry, they've even figured it out in the nuclear submarine industry, right? David Marquet turned the ship around, and leadership is language and all that kind of stuff of how, the whole idea is about creating leadership everywhere when it comes to solutions. But I just, I keep coming back to one of the major obstacles that we see in this big versus small argument, that as long as a cop-out answer can be, it's just business, we're in trouble. And I really have a lot of respect for your perspective on board responsibility, because what I think is starting to happen, not starting, it's mature. Folks are conflating fiduciary responsibility to be financial only.
Yep.
And it is much bigger.
Yeah.
How do we, when you start talking about how do you shape boards, that has been something that in general has been a big time role of the CEOs in general. And they basically cultivate that board to be what they need it to be. And the board ultimately is mostly given only what the CEO wants them to see. So how do we cultivate that skill set in board members? And when you look at some of the major health boards, across the country, there are high-powered people that ought to have these skills. The question is, what's happening in the execution?
Yeah. Yeah. Or to your point, why are they there? I think there also has to be a question of, are you there for what you're going to get out of it? Are you there truly to serve the community or region that you're there for? I look at it as, if you would go back in time, particularly, and it's not that long ago, but if you go back in time and look at all of our community hospitals and how their boards were formed, absolutely. Yes. Did the CEO have a role in the composition, the forming? Absolutely. But so did the community, because in so many cases, they were always from and of that community. And so I look at my own healthcare system where, for 101 years, that board was from the community. And today there's two people that are on that board that now roll up and serve on the system board. And, and those two people are the two exactly that the system would want, because they're not going to question, they're not going to bring the same level of, what the former board would have brought. And the rest of them are just an advisory board. So they really are just there to, look like they actually truly matter, but they're just an advisory board. And so to your point, I think this is one of the biggest opportunities of our healthcare time. And I think people will say to me all the time, well, how do you fix it? And I think there's a couple ways. I think we have to just like we have in other ways, like in our society, where we really started to really challenge things around diversity, equity, and inclusion. we have to do more in that way. We have to have medical suppliers who do business with healthcare systems say, I want to see a little bit more from your board. I want to see DEI on your board. I want to see different things. We've got to really start to force it, I think, in that way, because healthcare is all about the business. And so if the organizations that work with them in the business start to put pressure, I think that there's ways that we can get a little bit more accomplished. And I know it's going to take time, but we've got to do it. Now, yes, there's other ways we can engage the community. Should elected officials be challenging these things? Absolutely. But we all know there's lobbying, there's advocacy that's occurring. So, is that really going to happen? Probably not. And so we have to be honest about those things too. But we have to really get more attention around these issues, because to your point, whether it's a very large system or a system even in one state, we've started to really see, as I would say, the decisions that should be made in the benefit of the local community being made very, very far away without true resemblance of truly what that community needs.
I laugh at that because, Dr. Brown is more versed at it than I am, but we've had a local institution that was county owned here not long ago, purchased by a big healthcare system. And of course, the headquarters is not in Wilmington, North Carolina. It's, elsewhere. And then as it relates to business and mergers and acquisitions, they go through the protocol of what happens in a merger. And all of a sudden, they begin to strip away at some of the infrastructure of what was happening at the local institution. And all of a sudden, there's no real communication that's local from someone who knows the system. And instead, it's we don't hear anything from anyone when the real pillar in the community, being that institution, and being that it was local, now you don't hear anything from anyone. And so everything has gone quiet. How can we begin to get the big institutions who see it as business to understand that it's really about humanity, and it's really about having a local voice that conducts outreach to at least make the local people feel comfortable about the services that they would receive at that institution. And given the fact that of the size of it, the impact that it could have, not just from a healthcare perspective, but driving the economy of a local community.
Yeah. So I've thought a lot about this, because obviously it's also been what I've faced with my former system too. And right now, I think the way to get to those larger systems, if you're in a community that's faced that, is through the educational institutions and the training providers, because they need the workforce. And so I think community colleges and universities and colleges are in a really unique role to band together right now. And I think if, any community that's faced that those anchor institutions need to engage those local leaders and really talk about what it is that they want from that healthcare system. If they do that, they will be in a much stronger position than if they didn't. And so you have to really leverage what I would call true, authentic stakeholder engagement. Bring together all those other, businesses, band together like we used to do in the chambers of commerce, and really, look at them and say, you know what, maybe you don't want to pay attention when it's one or two of us, but if it's 50 to 100 of us, they're going to pay attention, because at the end of the day, they want that. The other, just to be, talk shop, is go after the competitors. Make sure the competitors know that they're not doing that. They may not be playing in that market today, but guess what? They may play in the future. And I think, North Carolina is seeing that in other spaces that probably people didn't think was going to occur. And so, I'm a firm believer that this is, again, where whether you're big or small, you can still demonstrate authenticity to care for people. And I think it saddens me greatly when I hear these stories, because this is exactly what we're hearing across the country and other places. I know my former healthcare system to this day, I will hear stories of, I don't hear anything from them. We used to hear everything from your previous organization. And I will always say, people make different decisions. That's all I can tell you. I'm not going to go and speak ill of them because I can't, nor would I. But the reality of it is I always say the proof is in the pudding. So if you're a healthcare system and you're not truly authentically engaged in the community, it's going to come back and get you, because patients do have a right to speak. And in that circumstance, in that real circumstance, our former competitor has reaped the benefits of it. And to this day, they're still reaping the benefits of it because they realize that weakness occurred and they have just swooped in. And so those are some of the thoughts, but I think education really has to be a vital player right now, especially because, again, back to the initial point about eds and meds, workforce education has to be on there. And you know what? Every healthcare system needs every worker that they could get right now. And so if they're not engaged, this is a great opportunity because they really need the workers.
That's a great segue to a little bit of a pivot I want to hit, because I think one of the evolutions that we're seeing as these systems get bigger is healthcare is kind of an oxymoron, right? Like that's not at all what it's about. It's about medical care. And as the systems get bigger, the truth of it is there's even more emphasis on the medical care piece of when people become truly ill. And what we've seen across our country is these changes, that's happening increasingly, right? Like, we're not getting healthier, particularly the last 3 years, but that's a whole nother thing. It just kind of showed some existential factors that have been dwelling under the surface for a long time. But the truth of it is, perhaps these big medical care systems, and I said that word differently on purpose, really are incapable of delivering health. I mean, I think we have to contemplate that, maybe that's one thing. That gets you back into what you said about the educational pieces. It gets you back into how we drive social determinants of health to different directions, how we engage communities in different ways. And maybe there needs to be a clean break. Not that that's even possible at this point in time, but I mean, we'd have to talk it into existence and just understand, hey, you don't go to the hospital to get healthy. You only go there, when you need a repair because you're broken down. I personally have been thinking along those lines for some time, but I just kind of wonder what you think about that particular distinction.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really insightful one, because to your point, I had this discussion. I serve on the Western Governors University Health Council, and some of the most well-known organizations are represented there from the healthcare perspective. And me being me, I threw out, maybe we need to just start fresh. And some of them took great offense to that. But I said to them, and this is how I would also answer you, is if we don't, startups are going to. We're seeing that now.
That's right.
Startups are definitely thinking about this. And what's really great about some of the startups that are coming up and really being intentional in this effort is so many of them have come from healthcare. So many of them left healthcare for the exact reasons that we're talking about here, and are thinking with such an entrepreneurial spirit, but an entrepreneurial spirit focused on human-centered design. And so in my view, it's either our healthcare system has to realize that this change is absolutely coming, because we already see it. Amazon's doing it, Walmart's doing it, but others are doing it. But the reality of it is I still think there's a lot of work to do around the human aspect about it. And that's where I'm really encouraged by some of the startups, because I think that, if they can get the right backing, and obviously I would encourage them to be thoughtful around that too, because, you can't sell your soul to an outlet that's not a good choice either in this space, because we've seen that impact too. That if they can get the right backing, we could have a great result within our healthcare system.
there is no health care or medical care without the human being, right?
Yeah.
So to make that paradigm shift from what we call health care to make them understand that it's really medical care, right? Because people are going there because they're ill, they have an issue, and they want that issue resolved. Versus healthcare, as Dr. Brown mentioned, that encompasses. Let's take a look at your dietary regimen and see how you're eating. Let's take a look at what you're reading and what you're absorbing from a media perspective, right? Because that plays on our mental health. So it's a holistic approach to healthcare. And so it goes back to what you said about education, more investment in educating people and institutions. But then when big business hear education, they want to know what type of return on investment will we receive by bringing in some people to teach some of these skills that we don't have. And if we can't get that, then we'll do it internally when they naturally or normally don't have the resources to do so. How do we build the business case around humanity to show these large institutions that you guys need this, not the training, you need the education, because training and education are two totally different things. How do we build a business case to show that to these large health or these large medical institutions?
Yeah. So let me first say too that to Dr. Brown, to your point before, that our education institutions also need to do a better job around teaching around healthcare, because today it's so acute care focused and centered that, as someone that's regularly taught in graduate programs at different institutions, I always will say to our students, when I get the syllabus, the first thing I see on there is the previous professors only ever taught acute care. And I always say, well, what about pre-hospital? What about post-acute? And what about home-based? And so, I think that there's a lot of work in that space too. We really have to teach the full ecosystem of our medical and healthcare. But I think to your point, Dr. Jackson, it's really interesting because when you think about it, there's some encouraging data that's come out of some of the more recent data, and I don't just cite Guild because I know everyone has different views of different organizations, but one of the things that's come out of some of the more recent data that Guild has showing that, and Guild works with a lot of large employers in the country, not just in healthcare, Chipotle and many other large employers, that if you do truly invest in employees around training and education, not only do you improve them, but also you do improve your organization. And there's been some really good data around career mobility that has been very, very encouraging. And I'm actually, a part of a project right now working with a large Florida-based healthcare system doing some career mobility work. And they have chosen to invest in the allied health space among their workforce and looking to upskill their workforce into other roles. And it's phenomenal because in just a month, over 500 employees have chosen to take an allied health program that's around upskilling, around career mobility. And so many of these people are people like food service, dietary aides, environmental services, wanting to become a farm tech, wanting to become a surge tech, various different roles like that. And so, I think there's definitely great opportunities there. The other piece that I'd say is there's been a lot of data over the last year that specifically has highlighted that for the first time in the top 3, obviously we know people leave healthcare for pay at times. And we know people will leave at times because of culture. But the third in a lot of surveys recently has been, if my employer doesn't invest in me from an education or training perspective, I will go elsewhere. That's an encouraging statistic because if I were a chief human resource officer, or I was in the C-suite of a healthcare system, and if I'm not paying attention to those things, which we know some still aren't, I would be really concerned about that number, because what's going to happen is that's going to only continue to increase. And I think that what I'm encouraged by is there are other organizations that are really seeing the benefits of these types of things. And my advice to every healthcare system is if you don't have a career mobility plan, you're way behind the times. Because strategic human resource management, workforce development is all about career mobility. And if your career mobility plan doesn't include diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, you're also way behind the times. Because it's what people are going to expect. It's what workforce is going to expect. And we've got to move and advance really quickly here in healthcare.
And this kind of taps into something we went over yesterday, Terry, in our creativity and personal mastery class around, from a leadership standpoint, why should you be doing those things, right? And what we see, I think, a lot of times in the industry, when you look around the country, organizations that have caught on to this are still mostly doing it in their own self-interest, expecting a reciprocity. Whereas from a true human-centered leadership perspective, the reason to do it is because it's right for the people who work for you. And, on a big picture, you got to believe that in the end of the day, it's going to work out. But if you go into it with programmatic design that builds in too much hook, it takes away the autonomy from the person who wants to be able to capitalize on your investment in them. I think, I think it underperforms. And if we got to the point where we were really just doing this, the old saying around, what if I invest in this person and they leave? And the flip side of that is, what if I don't invest in them and they stay? So there's this whole, what's the right way? And I think we always got to be careful saying right and wrong. But with that said, if we're just doing the things to develop the people and leaving it to them to make their own decisions as it goes forward, if we do a good job, it almost always works out.
Yeah.
And it's a leap of faith, but it gets back to what you have been hitting on the whole time, which that's leading with heart, right? Like, that's being human-centered, right? Like, I want to invest in the people that are my team just because it makes us a better team for the time that we're a team. And even goes to Ted Lasso, when the girl leaves the organization, right? And she's worried about telling Rebecca that she's gotten a great offer. And the guy says, well,
yeah,
great bosses expect that that'll happen.
That's right. That's right.
And we need more of that, I think. We need more folks who are in that space of saying, hey, we're going to coach the coaching culture. You talked about it almost at the top of the hour, and I know Terry had done a lot of work with our organization in the past on creating that culture of coaching, right? Where it just ultimately, it does build in the reciprocity principle to a great degree, but it's not because it's expected. It's because it feels right both ways. And so, to me, there's no answer, right? There's no question of what should we do? Because the truth is, we don't know. And it's either built in to the leadership or it's not there. And so I don't know, I think it's fascinating. My wheels continue to spin around your perspective on board responsibility, because I think that's really important. And I think getting those folks the right education and understanding, especially with such a small percentage of them actually having any healthcare background, is just so important. It almost is, that's a startup idea in and of itself.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Well, now, if you were going to sort of leave we got just a couple minutes left. If you were going to leave our listeners with a couple of just pearls straight from the heart of Geoffrey Roche, what would they be?
Yeah. I particularly would say, to your point earlier around our healthcare workforce, my advice and guidance to individuals in it today is, not only do we need them, but we need their ideas. I have often found that in many organizations, they're not invited to share, but we've got to give people the opportunity to do so. There's so much that we can find if we listen to people, and there's so much that we can accomplish when we do it together. And so from my vantage point, if we can be very intentional around getting back to what healthcare should be, which is truly about one another, and really being human-centered, and really get back to what I say is the first letter in leadership, which is L for leadership, is listening. Mm-hmm. If we can be an intentional, active listener in the workplace and truly hear the concerns in healthcare, I think if we're truly a person who cares with heart and leads with heart, we can be in a much different place. And again, to your point about wheels turning on the boards, I think if you're a board member out there, I would think about what you're there to do. To me, it's hard to think that the only thing that's fiduciary is finance, when every other issue that we've talked about impacts the finances. And so, I would just encourage those board members to think with their hearts. And I would also encourage the workforce to not be afraid to challenge the boards. As I tell my students when I teach them, go find out who those board members are. They need to hear from you. You're the nurse taking care of the patients. If they don't want to hear from you, then I'm not sure who they want to hear from. And so those are some of the thoughts I would share.
That is really, really powerful. And it's been a fast hour
yes,
in the academic, circling back to education, right? 50 minutes, 50 minutes is an hour. Yeah. Love it, But, thank you so much, Geoffrey, for joining us today. Thanks to our listeners for being with us. And we really look forward to sharing this episode. And it's on Facebook Live now. It will be on our YouTube channel, Unlikely Intersections, very shortly. You can find it at unlikelyintersection.com as well. You can find me at docphilipbrown.com or on LinkedIn at Doc Philip Brown. And Terry, where can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Terry Jackson, PhD. You can find me on Facebook as well. Matter of fact, Geoffrey, if someone wanted to find you, maybe they're interested in you speaking to their organization, how could they find you?
Yeah, best would be LinkedIn. Just look for Geoffrey M. Roche. I'm happy to connect with anybody there.
I think we've done it, and we'll see you guys at the next intersection.